Sarah always enjoyed hiking alone, finding peace in the solitude of the forest. One autumn afternoon, she ventured down an unfamiliar path. As the sun set, she realized she was lost. Suddenly, she heard a whisper coming from the trees. "Sarah, join us." The voices seemed to come from all directions. Terrified, she ran, but the trees seemed to move, blocking her path. Branches stretched out like bony fingers, trying to grasp her. The whisper intensified. "Join us, Sarah, forever." The next morning, forest rangers found only Sarah's backpack. She was never seen again. Sarah had become part of the forest, her voice now joining the chorus that calls the unwary into the dark depths of the woods. Weeks passed, and the search for Sarah continued. Family, desperate, hired an experienced tracker named Jack to investigate her disappearance. Jack, skeptical by nature, entered the forest determined to find rational answers. On the third day of his search, he reached the area where Sarah's backpack had been found. The air was heavy with palpable tension. Jack noticed something strange about the surrounding trees. Their bark seemed to have patterns vaguely resembling human faces in agony. While examining the site, a branch fell nearby. Jack bent down to pick it up and froze. The branch was shaped like a human hand, fingers curved as if trying to grasp something. Then he heard it, a soft, almost inaudible whisper. "Jack, help us." He turned around, searching for the source of the voice. It seemed familiar, as if it were Sarah calling. Jack moved forward, following the sound. The trees seemed to close behind him, blocking his way back. The whisper intensified, now a mix of voices. Among them, he clearly distinguished Sarah's voice. "Jack, please? Free us." Suddenly, roots emerged from the ground, wrapping around his legs. Jack struggled, but the more he fought, the tighter the roots held him. He saw, horrified, faces forming on the surrounding trees, empty eyes watching him with an ancient hunger. As he was pulled into the ground, Jack realized the terrible truth. Forest was not just a place, it was a living entity, hungry for human souls. And now, he would join Sarah and countless others, forever part of the whispering chorus that lures the unsuspecting into its deadly embrace. Forest returned to silence, satisfied with its new acquisition. And somewhere in the depths, two new voices joined the eternal whisper of the trees. Mark and his friends decided to camp in a remote area of the forest. At night, they discovered an old cabin that wasn't on any maps. Curious, they decided to investigate. Inside, they found claw marks on the walls and bones scattered across the floor. A dusty diary revealed the story of a hunter who turned into something monstrous on nights of the full moon. Laughing at the absurd story, they decided to spend the night there. At midnight, they heard a terrifying howl. The cabin door burst open, revealing a creature half man, half wolf. They realized too late it was a full moon night. The moon shone indifferently over the cabin, silent witness to another bloody night in the ancient pines forest. Days later, a search team was sent to find the three missing friends. Led by an experienced forest ranger named Frank, they followed the coordinates of the last check-in by the campers. Upon arriving at the cabin, they found a disturbing scene. Claw marks covered the exterior walls, and the door was ripped off its hinges. Inside was a mess, clear signs of a violent struggle. Dry bloodstains covered the floor and walls. Frank, examining the marks, muttered, "This wasn't done by any animal I know." As the team gathered evidence, one of the searchers found the diary mentioned by the missing friends. The last pages contained frantic drawings of a half-man, half-wolf creature, along with notes about lunar cycles. As the sun began to set, an unease settled over the group. Frank decided it was time to leave, but when they tried to leave, they found themselves inexplicably lost. The trails seemed different, leading them back to the cabin repeatedly. With the fall of night, they heard distant howls that didn't belong to any common wolf. Full moon emerged, bathing the forest in a ghostly light. Frank, looking at the sky in growing horror, realized they were trapped in the same nightmare that had consumed the campers. Monstrous silhouettes began moving between the trees surrounding the group. The howls grew closer, mixed with screams that sounded terrifyingly human. The search team found themselves cornered in the cabin, the same trap that had sealed the fate of Mark, Jess, and Tom. As the creatures closed in, Frank realized the terrible truth. The curse of the cabin not only transformed its victims, but imprisoned them in an eternal cycle of horror, forcing them to hunt others to survive. And now they would become part of that curse, forever trapped in the ancient pines forest, transforming into monsters with each full moon, doomed to perpetuate the cycle of terror that began so many years ago. Photographs of an ancient ceremonial clearing attracted a group of anthropology students to the forest. They planned to spend the night observing the site. At midnight, candles lit themselves around the clearing. Hooded figures emerged from the shadows, forming a circle. The students, paralyzed with fear, watched the start of a macabre ritual. When the figures turned towards them, they revealed deformed faces and glowing eyes. "New sacrifices have arrived," a guttural voice announced. The students' screams echoed through the forest, but no one heard them. The next morning, the clearing was empty and silent. There was no sign of the students or the nocturnal ritual. Only the trees around seemed more twisted, their branches stretched as if they had been well fed during the night. Weeks after the disappearance of Professor Elena and her students, a new expedition was organized. This time, a team of paranormal investigators, led by the renowned Dr. Marcus Blackwood, decided to uncover the mystery of the clearing. Equipped with cutting-edge technology and protective amulets, they arrived at the edge of the clearing at dusk. Immediately, their equipment began to register abnormal readings, intense electromagnetic fluctuations, and inexplicable energy patterns. Dr. Blackwood, sensing the oppressive atmosphere, ordered the team to form a circle of salt around them. As they conducted sweeps, one of the investigators, Sarah, noticed something strange about the trees. "Doctor," she called, her voice trembling. "The trees. They have faces." Looking closer, horrified, they saw that the bark of the trees formed expressions of agony, as if people were trapped inside them. Dr. Blackwood, recognizing the danger, tried to order a retreat, but it was too late. The sun set, and the clearing came alive. The ground began to pulse, and a dark mist emerged from the center. The voices began, first whispers, then screams of terror and supplication. Among them, they recognized the voices of Professor Elena and her students. Hooded figures emerged from the shadows, but this time, the circle of salt kept them at bay. Dr. Blackwood began reciting protection spells, fighting against the force trying to pull them into the center of the clearing. Sarah, however, felt an irresistible pull towards the mist. Her eyes fixed on a familiar figure forming in the center. It was her long-lost brother. "Tommy?" she whispered, stepping out of the circle of protection. "Sarah, no," shouted Dr. Blackwood, but it was too late. The moment she crossed the salt line, the hooded figures surrounded her. Her scream of terror was muffled as the mist engulfed her. The remaining investigators fought through the night, reciting spells and resisting the pull of the ancient entity inhabiting the clearing. When the sun finally rose, they found themselves alone, exhausted, and traumatized. Dr. Blackwood, looking at the seemingly peaceful clearing in the daylight, understood they had faced something beyond human comprehension. The forest held ancient and terrible secrets, and those who dared disturb them paid an unimaginable price. The expedition returned with one member less, and the weight of knowing that some mysteries should remain unexplored. The shadow forest would continue to lure the curious and the unsuspecting, feeding on their souls to maintain the balance of a pact made millennia ago. During a hike, Alex was suddenly enveloped by a thick fog that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Disoriented, he tried to find his way back. In the fog, he started hearing voices calling for help. Following the sounds, Alex came across human silhouettes in the mist. As he approached, he realized they were just standing skeletons, trapped in place. Horrified, he tried to flee, but the fog seemed to have a life of its own, wrapping around him. Alex felt his body stiffen, his skin drying out. He had become another victim of the hungry fog of the forest. Days later, when the fog finally lifted, there was no sign of Alex. Just another skeleton had joined the macabre collection in the clearing, its eyes now glowing with the same ghostly light, a new sentinel to warn the unwary who ventured into Blackwood Forest. Months after Alex's disappearance, his twin sister Olivia couldn't accept the official explanation. Tormented by nightmares, and an inexplicable feeling that Alex was still alive, she decided to investigate on her own. Armed with Alex's diary and state-of-the-art equipment, Olivia entered Blackwood Forest. She felt a strange connection to the place, as if the forest itself was calling her. On the third day, Olivia arrived at the clearing where Alex had disappeared. The air was heavy, charged with a supernatural energy. While setting up her camp, she noticed strange shapes in the shadows between the trees, silhouettes that seemed human but moved unnaturally. At midnight, the fog appeared. Dense and pulsating, it seemed alive. Prepared, Olivia activated an experimental force field she had brought. Fog surrounded the field, testing its resistance. Then she saw them, the skeletons trapped in the fog, their eyes glowing with spectral light. Among them, Olivia recognized Alex's form. Her heart raced as he turned toward her, his empty eyes meeting hers. "Olivia." Alex's voice echoed in her mind. "You came." Fighting the urge to run to him, Olivia stayed within the force field. "Alex, what happened to you?" "Fog. It feeds on us, our essence, our memories. We're trapped here, Olivia, forever." Tears streamed down Olivia's face as she watched her brother and the other victims trapped in the foggy limbo. Force field began to fail, the hungry fog slowly penetrating. In a moment of desperate clarity, Olivia realized she couldn't save Alex. She could prevent others from suffering the same fate. With trembling hands, she activated an emergency signal device, alerting the authorities to the supernatural danger in the forest. As the force field collapsed, Olivia looked one last time at her brother. "I love you, Alex. Rest now." The fog enveloped her, and Olivia felt her essence merging with Alex's and the other trapped souls. Together, they became guardians of the forest, their consciousness united in the eternal fog, warning unwary travelers of the hidden dangers of Blackwood. When the authorities arrived, they found only Olivia's equipment and a journal detailing the truth about the hungry fog. Blackwood Forest was declared a forbidden zone, its dark secrets sealed to protect the outside world from the horror lurking in its misty heart. The old wooden bridge spanning the deep ravine was an impressive sight, even in daylight. Its worn planks creaked in the wind, and the structure seemed to defy gravity over the dark chasm below. For the locals, the Bridge of Laments was more than a mere passage. It was the stage of countless dark legends. Laura, a skeptical journalist specializing in debunking urban myths, arrived in the small town, determined to prove that the stories about the bridge were mere superstition. The locals spoke in hushed voices about the tormented souls of suicides who had jumped from the bridge, condemned to wander eternally in the ravine, calling the living to join them. Ignoring the villagers' warnings, Laura announced that she would spend the night on the bridge, broadcasting live on the internet to prove there was nothing supernatural about the place. Equipped with cameras, microphones, and paranormal measurement devices, she arrived at the bridge just before midnight. The moonlight cast grotesque shadows through the planks, and the wind howled in the ravine like a distant lament. Laura began her broadcast, narrating the history of the bridge as she walked slowly across it. At midnight, the wind abruptly stopped. Sepulchral silence fell over the place. Then Laura heard it, moans and wails coming from beneath the bridge, a chorus of agonizing voices that made her blood run cold. Before she could react, spectral hands emerged between the planks, grabbing her ankles with supernatural strength. Fingers cold as ice dug into her flesh, and Laura felt herself being pulled down. "Join us," the voices whispered in unison. "Share our eternal pain." Laura struggled, screaming for help as her camera continued to broadcast. Online viewers watched in horror, unable to believe what they were seeing. The hands multiplied, inexorably pulling her towards the planks that began to separate. In her last moment of lucidity, Laura realized her fatal mistake. Her disbelief would not protect her from the horror she had awakened. With a final scream, she was dragged into the darkness beneath the bridge. The broadcast continued for hours, showing only the empty bridge and the sound of the wind. When the first rays of sunlight touched the old planks, there was no sign of Laura. Just another lament, now familiar, joined the chorus beneath the bridge. Authorities never found her body. The Bridge of Laments had claimed another soul, and the legend grew. fueled by the viral video that captured Laura's last moments. Now, locals say if you listen carefully while crossing the bridge at night, you can hear Laura's voice among the laments, still broadcasting her final report for eternity. The video of Laura's disappearance went viral, triggering a wave of conspiracy theories and paranormal investigation. Among those fascinated by the story was Dr. Emily Chen, a renowned parapsychologist determined to uncover the mystery of the Bridge of Laments. Accompanied by a team of specialists and equipped with cutting-edge technology, Dr. Chen arrived in the small town. Her presence caused anxiety among the locals, who feared further disturbances might awaken something even worse. On the first night of investigation, the team set up an elaborate monitoring system on the bridge. Full-spectrum cameras, EMF detectors, and high-sensitivity audio recorders were strategically positioned. At midnight, the equipment detected a drastic change in the environment. The temperature dropped abruptly, and the energy meters spiked. On the cameras, nebulous shapes began to materialize, spectral silhouettes emerging from the abyss beneath the bridge. Dr. Chen, watching the monitors, was stunned when she recognized one of the figures. "It's Laura," she whispered, seeing the form of the missing journalist among the tormented souls. The voices began, a chorus of laments echoing through the audio equipment. Among them, Laura's voice stood out. "Emily, you came. You need to tell the truth." Driven by the discovery, Dr. Chen made a fatal mistake. She stepped onto the bridge. Instantly, spectral hands appeared, grabbing her. Her team watched in horror as she was dragged to the edge. In her last moment, Dr. Chen managed to shout, "The bridge is a portal. They're trapped between worlds." With a flash of light, she disappeared, joining the trapped souls beneath the bridge. The data collected that night revealed a shocking truth. The Bridge of Laments was a nexus between the living world and a dimension of eternal torment. The souls trapped there were forced to lure others to keep the portal open, caught in an endless cycle of despair. Confronted with irrefutable evidence of the supernatural, authorities took drastic measures. The bridge was sealed, the area declared an exclusion zone, and an elaborate containment system was installed to prevent the influence of the trapped souls from spreading. But at night, locals say, you can still hear the laments. And now, among the tormented voices, echo Laura's last words and Dr. Chen's warnings, an eternal reminder of the dangers of seeking knowledge beyond the limits of human understanding. The Bridge of Laments remains a dark monument, a sealed portal between worlds, guarding its secrets and the souls of those who dared to challenge its mysteries. Maya Thornton had always been fascinated by urban legends and inexplicable mysteries. From a young age, she collected books on paranormal phenomena and spent hours browsing obscure internet forums. Now, at 28, she ran a popular podcast about the unexplainable called Whispers in the Dark. When an anonymous listener sent a message about the Forgotten Forest, a remote area in the Appalachians where people mysteriously disappeared and strange sounds were heard, Maya knew she had found her next big case. After weeks of research, Maya discovered that the Forgotten Forest had a dark history dating back to the early settlers. Reports of disappearances spanned centuries, always accompanied by descriptions of strange voices and trees that seemed to move. The Native Americans in the region had long avoided the place, calling it a place where souls speak. Determined to uncover the mystery, Maya meticulously prepared for the expedition. Along with her state-of-the-art camera and ultra-sensitive audio recorders, she brought survival gear, an advanced GPS, and even a small drone for aerial mapping. On an autumn morning, Maya ventured into the dense forest. The air was heavy, laden with a thin mist that seemed to whisper ancient secrets. Trees, old and gnarled, appeared to watch her with silent intelligence. On the first day, Maya noticed something deeply disturbing: the absolute silence. There were no bird songs or insect buzzes. Forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The only sounds were her own footsteps and her increasingly rapid breathing. At night, while reviewing her recordings at her makeshift camp, Maya made a shocking discovery. In the background, almost imperceptible, there was a distant echo of voices. They were fragments of conversation, occasional laughter, distant cries, sounds she hadn't heard during the day. Intrigued and a little scared, Maya decided to follow the sound the next day. The deeper she went into the forest, clearer the voices became. The GPS began to fail, and Maya realized she was straying from her planned route. The temptation to discover the source of the voices was too strong. On the third day, exhausted and disoriented, Maya reached a circular clearing. In the center stood an ancient and monstrous tree, its twisted trunk marked by strange symbols that seemed to change when she blinked. The voices were now clear, emanating from the tree as if from a badly tuned radio. Fascinated and terrified in equal measure, Maya slowly approached. Her electronic equipment began to fail one by one, screens flickering with static before shutting down completely. With trembling hands, she touched the tree's trunk and felt a strange vibration beneath her fingers, as if the wood was pulsing with life. Suddenly, the voices fell silent. A moment of absolute quiet followed, so profound that Maya could hear her own heartbeat. Then she heard a single voice, clear as crystal, seemed to come from within her own mind. "Welcome, Maya. We have been waiting for you for so long." Maya tried to step back but found she couldn't move. Looking down, she saw with horror that roots had silently emerged from the ground, wrapping around her feet and legs. The tree's trunk began to open like a hungry mouth, revealing a black, pulsating void within. The voices returned in a deafening chorus, thousands of trapped souls screaming in unison. Maya recognized some of them, missing persons whose cases she had researched, explorers lost for decades, even the voice of a child whose disappearance had led her to start her podcast. "Join us, Maya," voices sang. "Become part of something greater. Become eternal." Maya screamed as she felt her body being inexorably pulled into the tree. She fought, trying to cling to her identity, her memories, but she felt her consciousness fragmenting, merging with the chorus of voices. In her final moments of individuality, Maya understood the terrible truth. The forgotten forest was not just a place. It was an ancient, hungry entity, feeding on the souls of the curious and the lost for millennia. And now she would become part of this entity, her voice joining the eternal chorus, another soul captured by the forgotten forest. Weeks later, a rescue team entered the forest, searching for Maya. They never found her. Sometimes, on silent nights, they could hear a familiar voice echoing among the trees, calling for help, luring them deeper into the forest. The forgotten forest waited patiently, knowing there would always be more curious souls, more to feed its insatiable hunger. The cycle would continue, echoing through time, an eternal chorus of lost souls whispering their secrets in the shadows of the ancient trees. And somewhere, in the heart of the forest, fragmented consciousness of Maya Thornton continued her eternal quest for the mystery that consumed her, now part of the very enigma she had so longed to solve. Dr. Elias Blackwood, a renowned botanist and ecologist, had always been drawn to the inexplicable. At 55, he had dedicated his life to studying unique ecosystems around the world. When he received an anonymous email about a peculiar forest in the Pacific Northwest Mountains, his curiosity was immediately piqued. The email spoke of trees that seemed to move, inexplicable sounds, and an alarming number of disappearances over the years. Intrigued, Elias assembled a small research team, Dr. Samantha Chen, brilliant 32-year-old molecular biologist, and Jake Martinez, a seasoned 40-year-old forest guide. Upon arriving in the small town of Pine Hollow, the team was met with wary glances and veiled warnings. The town's elder, Margaret Holloway, 87, approached them at the local inn. "The Whispering Pines forest is no place for outsiders," she warned, her clouded eyes fixed on Elias. "It is hungry, and you are just another feast." Ignoring the warnings, the team ventured into the forest on a misty autumn morning. The air was thick, carrying a sweet and slightly putrid aroma. The trees, ancient sequoias, seemed to stretch endlessly toward the sky. On the first day, Samantha noticed something strange in her soil sample. The bacteria displayed a behavior never seen before, almost symbiotic with the tree roots. Jake, meanwhile, swore the trails changed when he wasn't looking. At night, while analyzing their data, they heard it. A soft whisper, distant voices conversing. Elias turned on his recorders, capturing what seemed to be a conversation in an unknown language. On the second day, the team split up. Samantha stayed at the camp to analyze the samples, while Elias and Jake explored deeper into the forest. That's when things started to go wrong. Elias and Jake discovered a clearing with a colossal tree at the center, its trunk marked with ancient symbols. As they approached, they felt a strange vibration in the air. Jake touched the trunk and screamed, pulling his hand back as if burned. "Doctor, we need to leave now," Jake shouted, but it was too late. Roots burst from the ground, grabbing Jake's legs. Elias watched in horror as the guide was dragged towards the tree, which opened like a hungry mouth. Jake's screams echoed through the forest before abruptly stopping. Elias ran back to the camp, his heart pounding frantically. When he arrived, he found Samantha in a trance, her eyes fixed on a sample of moss that pulsed with a strange light. "Samantha, we need to leave now," Elias shouted, pulling her. Samantha just smiled, empty and distant smile. "Don't you see, Dr. Blackwood? We finally discovered it. Forest, it is conscious, it is ancient, and it is hungry." Horrified, Elias saw Samantha's veins darken, as if roots were growing under her skin. She stood up mechanically and began walking toward the clearing. Elias fled, running blindly through the forest that now seemed alive and hostile. Branches whipped his face, roots tried to snare his feet. The whispering voices intensified, now clearly audible. "Join us, Elias. Become part of something greater. Come eternal." Exhausted and disoriented, Elias finally reached the forest's edge. Looking back, he saw the trees move, closing the exit behind him. In the sudden silence, he heard Jake and Samantha's voices, calling him to return. Elias ran through the town, shouting for help, but the townsfolk only watched with sad, resigned eyes. Margaret Holloway met him at the town's exit. "You escaped, but at a cost," she said softly. "The forest has marked you, it will wait, and one day you will return." Months later, in his university office, Elias stared intently at the samples he had brought from the forest. The moss still pulsed with that strange light, and sometimes, late at night, could swear he heard voices whispering from inside the jar, calling him back to Whispering Pines. Elias knew it was only a matter of time. The forest was patient, and it always reclaimed what it considered its own. In the heart of the remote hollow woods, an ancient legend whispered among the locals spoke of spectral encounters that left few survivors. The forest, dark and dense, was said to be haunted by spirits of those who had vanished within its shadows, their souls forever bound to the cursed land. Emma Carter, an aspiring journalist with a passion for the supernatural, decided to investigate the eerie tales surrounding hollow woods. Armed with a camera, a voice recorder, and her skeptical friend Mark, she ventured into the town of Black Hollow, nestled on the forest's edge. The townspeople greeted them with wary eyes and murmured warning. Old Tom, the town's unofficial historian, approached them at the only diner. "You're better off leaving, girl. The woods don't take kindly to strangers. They say the spirits in there are restless and hungry." Emma, undeterred by the warnings, pressed for more information. Old Tom relayed chilling accounts of people disappearing, only to return days later, their minds shattered and their bodies marked with strange symbols. Determined to uncover the truth, Emma and Mark set off into Hollow Woods the following morning. As they ventured deeper, the forest grew unnaturally silent. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. An oppressive stillness hung in the air. Emma noted the change, her excitement mingling with a creeping sense of unease. They set up camp near a small clearing and decided to explore further in the morning. That night, as they reviewed their footage by the campfire, they heard it. Faint whispering carried on the breeze. At first, it was indistinguishable, but as the night wore on, the whispers grew louder, forming disjointed phrases in an ancient, forgotten language. Emma turned on her recorder, hoping to capture the eerie sounds. Suddenly, the whispering ceased. An oppressive silence followed, broken only by the crackling fire. Then, out of the darkness, a figure emerged. It was a woman, her clothes tattered, her eyes vacant. She moved with a ghostly grace, her feet not quite touching the ground. "Help me," she pleaded, her voice a haunting echo. "They won't let me leave." Mark, ever the skeptic, moved towards the woman, trying to rationalize her presence. But as he approached, the woman's form flickered, revealing a hollow emptiness where her eyes should have been. She let out a piercing scream and Mark stumbled back, terror etched on his face. Emma, recording everything, felt a cold hand grip her shoulder. She spun around, but no one was there. The forest seemed to close in on them, the trees shifting and groaning as if alive. Shadows danced at the edge of the firelight, and the whispers returned, now angry and insistent. "We should leave," Mark whispered, his bravado shattered. Emma nodded, but as they packed their gear, the forest came alive with ghostly apparitions. Figures emerged from the darkness, their faces twisted in eternal torment. Emma and Mark fled, but the forest seemed to stretch on endlessly, the path back to town vanishing. Days passed, or so it seemed. Time lost meaning in the haunted woods. Emma and Mark stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. Desperate for shelter, they entered, finding a dusty journal that chronicled the experiences of previous explorers. The journal spoke of a ritual that bound the spirits to the forest. Ritual that could only be broken by sacrificing a willing soul. As they read, the apparitions grew more aggressive, their whispers turning into screams. Mark, driven to the brink of madness, decided to offer himself to free the spirits. Emma tried to stop him, but he was resolute. "It's the only way," he said, his eyes hollow and resigned. With a heavy heart, Emma watched as Mark recited the incantation from the journal. The spirits swirled around him, their screams reaching a crescendo. A blinding light enveloped the cabin, and then silence. Emma awoke at the edge of Hollow Woods, the morning sun casting long shadows. The forest was still and silent, the oppressive presence gone. Mark was nowhere to be found, his sacrifice seemingly accepted by the restless spirit. Returning to Black Hollow, Emma recounted her harrowing experience. Old Tom listened, his eyes sad. "You freed them," he said, "but at what cost?" Emma left the town, her heart heavy with grief and the knowledge that some mysteries are better left unexplored. The legend of Hollow Woods lived on, haunting reminder of the price paid for seeking the truth.